If I were to mention the words King Kong and Indiana Jones to someone, for the most part, they would know exactly what I'm talking about. They would immediately conjure the images of a huge ape-like monster destroying New York City and a strong-toned Harrison Ford with a whip ready to save the day, respectively. These are visual images that have stood the test of time and become part of our society in many different ways. In some ways, they are movies that you grow up watching and therefore have a deep sense of nostalgia and craving for the adventure attached to them. But much more overwhelmingly, these films perpetuate the othering of villainous minorities that creates deeply racist themes in these otherwise fun movies. I'm interested in the specific perpetuation of these themes through the amusement rides that have been made based off of these films. In this video essay, I will analyze the danger of turning films such as King Kong and the Indiana Jones franchise into theme park rides that promote the reenactment of deeply white supremacist and colonial values and the othering and often villainizing of minorities. By taking you through the problematic content of the films and putting them side by side with clips from the famous rides, I will emphasize the stark similarities and thus the harrowing perpetuation of white supremacist ideals. First, I would like to establish a definition for ethnography from page 105 of King Kong and the Monster and Ethnographic Cinema in the Third Eye, Race, Cinema, and Ethnographic Spectacle by Fatima Tobing-Roney. Operating on a continuum with zoology, anthropology, botany, entomology, biology, and medicine, the camera, like the microscope, anatomized the other. The new visual apparatuses demonstrated the power of science to display and even decipher otherized cultures. Dissection and montage together created a presumably holistic portrait of the colonized. Technological inventions, in other words, mapped the globe as a disciplinary space of knowledge. One of the first uses of ethnography in film has been in documentaries like Nanook of the North. It is the idea that through the documentation of cultures that often the filmmaker doesn't understand, the camera intrudes on their life, making them into this other. I mention this because not only does King Kong directly take inspiration from an ethnographic film, but as said in the same article as aforementioned on page 159, King Kong is literally a film about the making of an ethnographic film. We see this through the character of Carl Denham, who travels to this island for the purpose of documenting a culture unknown to him. And it is a culture that is mostly unknown by the dominant audience, and because of that, as said on page 162, as Wilson Martinez and Asim Baliki have explained and documented, cultures in ethnographic films are usually seen by students and other audiences as aberrant, bizarre, and even repulsive, unless the culture on display is similar to the culture of the audience. This is important to know because of the very immersive position the audience gets put into on these amusement rides. They're able to step in the place of a character that is actively trying to get rid of the monster of, for this ride, King Kong, and victory is when we have successfully fleed. It creates a sense of troubling euphoria. As said on page 188, King Kong is a meditation on ethnographic realism, on the audience's desire to believe and disbelieve, to travel backwards and forwards in time, to embrace the ethnographic, see the world from his eyes, and then be rid of him, murder him. As an audience member in a cinema, we get to experience this passively. However, as a passenger on this ride, you get to experience this more actively. You get to ask the questions like on page 171 of, will Kong catch up? Will they make it? Moreover, will they make it back to civilization? Their running is a literal embodiment of the race of history, a race which is a locus of ethnographic cinema. The outcome is known, the monster will be destroyed, and the heroic whites will triumph, but there is always a tension, an element of uncertainty, a possibility that the race may go either way. We know we're going to get out, but come to this ride for the adrenaline, the possible fear that we won't. The stakes are higher in this position, and therefore the othering of this creature from another culture is even further established in the body. We can't let go of it. As said on page 170, the horror film genre works because the audience is fascinated by the monster's impurity, its hybridity, and because it is curious to get at the heart of this unknowable, the audience follows the narrative until it discloses all the secrets of the monster. And then the monster is discarded. Its use for our adrenaline rush is over, and the worst part of this all, most audience members of these rides are children. Now I direct your attention to the Indiana Jones franchise, specifically the film Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This franchise is even more popular, I dare say, and therefore has even more power to do damage. It is a household name. The racism is brushed under the carpet that Dr. Jones stands on. Indiana Jones lives in a space of not only othering minorities, but also establishing a superiority of the white male savior to these inferior minority people and spaces. This is touched on in Unthinking Eurocentrism on page 123. In the world of Indiana Jones, third world cultures are synopsized as theme park cliches drawn from the Orientalist repertoire. India is all spirituality, as in the Hegelian account, Shanghai's all gongs and rickshaws, third world landscapes becomes the stuff of dreamy adventures. Indeed, the series shows most of the unwashed masses of the third world as passively waiting for Indy to save them. These third world landscapes are shown as emotionally and physically in need of Indy saving them, and if that wasn't enough to make sure the audience understands the inferior-superior divide, we always start these stories in the city. I turn to Unthinking Eurocentrism again on page 168. The desert in this sense functions narratively at the site of moral liminality. Orientalist films often begin in the city, where European civilization has already tamed the East, but withhold the most dramatic conflicts for the desert, where defenseless white women can easily become the captives of romantic sheikhs or evil Arabs. And this is particularly important to my argument because this is the same experience the audience members of these rides have. They come to these amusement parks assumedly well off enough to afford such an experience and enter a perfectly crafted amusement park and are then immersed into the world of Indiana Jones. In this tiny pocket of about a 4-minute ride, audience members are able to experience what it would be like to be in the film for all it is. The villains, the fights, the drama they love, and then they get to leave. As said on page 143, the European is enchanted and seduced, but always returns home after having enjoyed the foreign woman/country without ever questioning his own cultural values. He goes native, but ultimately recovers from his traveling disorder to become the delegate of the virtues of science, technology, and modernity. We begin to understand these coined inferior spaces as a place that we can just go in and out as we please. We start to see these ideas of colonialism that this land is ours to infiltrate. Even more so, it is said on page 147, films often superimpose maps over shots of landscapes, subliminally asserting a claim, a kind of optical deed to the land. This technical work of the superimposition to establish a claim to the land is particularly troubling for how subtle and accepted it is widely across action films like this, and we crave it again and again for the adventure it promises. We anticipate these images because they have been coded into how we understand what action and adventure looks like. In these movies and these rides, audience members can escape and become a little bit more like Indiana Jones. And for the majority, they get to actually look like him too, enjoying the benefits of that as well. They see themselves in relation to the world as Indiana Jones does, which is someone who is saving the world from these othered villainous minorities like King Kong. I end with this quote on page 100. Adventure films and the adventure of going to the cinema provided a vicarious experience of passionate fraternity, a playing field for the self-realization of European masculinity, just as colonized space was available to empire and colonial landscapes were available to imperial cinema. So was this psychic space available for the play of the virile spectatorial imagination as a kind of mental Lebensraum. If this is how powerful the viewing of a film is, we must think of how much more powerful the immersive experience is. What happens when we feel like we are in the movie, when we're making the same choices and holding the same prejudices? These things have echoes. It allows viewers to feel validated in killing King Kong, who comes from a foreign land, and it allows viewers to feel validated in the defeat of evil foreign rapists because they/Indiana Jones save the white girl in the impoverished and weak communities. Even the communities Indiana Jones saves are just as othered, but are made to seem good because of their weakness. These things exist in the films. They are not just fun family adventure movies, but that is part of what the ride promises, a fun family adventure to establish dominance over anyone who looks different from the majority of viewers.